Y ahora viene un debate apasionante, como los que han antecedido este momento. Se trata del papel crucial de América Latina en el mundo de la transformación. Van a surgir ideas apasionantes, seguramente, es un tema desafiante. Y voy a pedirles que le den un aplauso a los integrantes del panel, que son Antonio Dominguez, presidente de la región de América Latina y el Caribe de Maersk, Natalia, Scaliter, directora general de Google Cloud Multipaís, Eduardo Coello, presidente de América Latina y el Caribe de Visa, Scott Brison, vicepresidente de gestión de patrimonios de BMO, y este panel va a estar moderado por Federico Ruiz Guiñazú, socio y director de la oficina en Argentina de McKinsey Latinoamérica Hispana. Les presento un video mientras ellos se van acomodando y los recibimos con un aplauso. Muchas gracias.
Finds us each day fully committed to work to be more efficient and to continue leading this important period of transformation for ourselves and for our planet. We highly value our ability to be protagonists in this important period when the electricity transition is coming to fruition. We're in a path of growth and sustainable development, transforming the most extensive electricity network in the country into an intelligent network. This enables us to offer a distribution service on the scale of electricity that is socially responsible and that contributes to a better quality of life for people, to the development of businesses, and for our community. We value our people, their security, and their lives. We provide training to our teams and support young professionals so that they can meet new challenges. We stay close to our people. We develop innovative tools and promote the continuous improvement of processes to successfully achieve our objectives. We value progress. We adapt new technologies and convert our buildings into intelligent buildings. We create new strategies so that we can be united as a corporation that efficiently consumes energy. We're conscious and responsible in all our decisions and actions. We seek to provide a corporate governance model that understands and adapts to the changing needs of today's world. We value our country, believing that a commitment to continuous investment is the only way to bring increased amounts of energy that is affordable, accessible, clean, and reliable in order to once again be protagonists in the new economies of the world. We value energy. We're the largest electricity distributor in Argentina, and we are constantly evolving to light the future. Edenor, the best Argentine energy.
Good morning, and thank you to the International Economic Forum of the Americas for having us today. We have an important topic to discuss. Over the last 25 years, Latin America's share of global GDP has decreased by 15%. We only represent now 6% of the global GDP, even though we have 8% of the global population. Additionally, over the last 25 years, global productivity has experienced an unbelievable growth. Productivity per worker at a global scale has increased 6 times, from $7,000 in 1997 per worker to $42,000 per worker in 2022. In the same period, Latin America has only increased 15%, from 37,000 to 43,000. If we had taken advantage of this global productivity surge and grown, for example, at the share of emerging Asia, our global GDP share would be 10% instead of 6%. What makes it even more urgent is that when we look at our growth over the last 25 years, 75% of that growth came from our demographic bonus. So the advantage of having a relatively young population joining the workforce. But over the next 25 years, we expect that demographic bonus to end, and probably even earlier for countries such as Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. So we have an urgent challenge. How do we actually dramatically increase our productivity to create a platform for sustainable and inclusive growth? When we look at the main factor of this productivity gap, what we see is it's mostly explained by investment. If we actually want to regain our fair share of global GDP, we have to invest twice our current investment for the next 25 years. 2 times what we're investing today in Latin America until 2050. This is particularly important in a moment where the world is changing, and we believe it might be entering into a new era, a world in which global order is changing, a way in which demographic forces are different. We have radical new technologies that can impact the way we work and operate. We have a different use for energy and resources, and we're seeing a change in the way the capital flows. So that's why we have this important discussion. How do we actually create this platform for sustainable and inclusive growth? And I have a fantastic panel today across different industries in order to discuss what could Latin America do to create that way. So let me start with the first question. And in this first round of questions, what we want to discuss is what context is Latin America operating in? What are the opportunities for economic growth given this macroeconomic context? And what are the levers to achieve it? So Scott, why don't you kick us off? And given the shifting dynamics in international trade, numerous opportunities are emerging for regions to reposition themselves and capitalize on these new market demands. In this context of global change, what are the key opportunities or niches that Latin America could explore?
Well, firstly, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. I'm the only one on this panel who's not I guess, a Latin American. But as a Canadian, I can tell you we are facing some of the same global challenges, just a little more quickly, that Latin America is vulnerable to. I was in cabinet as president of the Treasury Board in Justin Trudeau's cabinet when President Trump was elected for Trump 45. This is a very different, and we renegotiated at that time NAFTA, the USMCA, which now is no longer the greatest trade agreement ever signed, apparently, in Washington. But the fact is, neither Canada nor Latin American countries can depend necessarily on the U.S. and those Bretton Woods institutions and that sort of multilateral global leadership anymore. We can't change that, and it's never going to go back to what it was before under any president, to exactly what it was before. What we are responsible for is what we do in our own countries, and I believe that we have a new Prime Minister in Canada, Mark Carney. He became Prime Minister last Friday. He was sworn in. His first trip was to Europe on Sunday to meet with European leaders. Canada has free trade agreement with the EU. The Prime Minister's intention and plan is to deepen that economic cooperation, to go beyond trade agreements to actually deeper regulatory cooperation and deeper economic cooperation with Europe. But I think we need to do that with Latin America and Asian countries. It would be ironic, and I'm not speaking negatively on President Trump. America has a right to choose its leadership, and it has. But we have a responsibility for our own countries and our own regions. And what I hope comes out of this, and it's an ironic thing in certain ways, that an American president who is quite protectionist and isolationist and not a supporter of multilateral global liberalized trade could lead to the greatest wave of liberalization in our lifetime if the rest of the world, including Latin America and Canada and Asia, get our acts together. And I think there's an opportunity in this current chaos for us to do exactly that. And I think Argentina's success, frankly, is extremely important to all of Latin America right now. The world is watching, the world is cheering on some of the economic progress and stability that is coming out of Argentina. I'd like to see Canada being a good partner, deepening and expanding our relationship in everything from mining and infrastructure to agri-food. My message to Canadian businesses, and there's a lot of Canadian businesses active here, mining and pension funds and that sort of thing, but also in agri-food. My message to Canadian business leaders is that we have a vested interest in the success of Argentina, and now is the time to actually deepen our investments and relationships with Argentina. And so that would be my advice, recognizing I'm a tourist in effect.
It's good to have your international perspective.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
So, Antonio, in line with what Scott is mentioning of this new world order, how are shifting global trade dynamics impacting Latin American economies and supply chains? What do you see from your role at Maersk?
Well, I will try to differentiate between noise, because we have a lot of noise these days, to clear signals. We, as business people in this room, we need to actually look for signals to take decisions. That's our role. You know, we are not looking for noise. We need to understand what is a noise, what is a signal, and then what we do with that signal. So let me give you a couple of hard data that we see in the world right now. So when we look at the PMI right now, and the PMI is very important for everyone. It actually looks at the production of the world. Everyone is above 50%, meaning that everyone is expanding. As you know, above 50 is expansion, 50 is status quo, and then below 50, we're going into a recession. Right now, everybody is above 50, so that's positive. When we see month of month, yes, it has taken a hit. So it's not 15.8, it's 15.3, but still above 50. So that's positive. First check. The US economy is still strong. Actually, it's still a lot of consumption going on in the US economy. Actually, it has the strongest quarter ever in Q4 last year. So the noise that we hear is not what we see with the data. In fact, year on year, 3.5% expansion in the US economy. We expect the US economy to grow between 2.3 to 2.5% this year. China's economy grew 5% last year. 5% last year. The global container trade, 6% expansion. 6%. We are going back to the pre-pandemic, where actually, I have been 30 years in this trade. It was always GDP times 3. That was the global trade expansion. So 2.5 times 3 is pretty much around the 6% that we see. So that's good. The order book. Are we, as a shipping company, still ordering books? Yes. 10% expansion of the fleet. 10% year-on-year expansion of the fleet. There are more capacity coming in the next 2 years than one that we have right now, in the capacity. Idle capacity, pretty much zero. There are not idle vessels out there. They're all being used right now. So that's very positive. Spot rates. How do we see the rates in shipping going down? Finally, we actually see that we have been saying for years. We always said in shipping, we don't control rates. It's the market who controls rates. When there are challenges in the system, the rates go up. Right now, the rates are going down. Charter rates. There are no vessels, charter rates going up. Crazy. You pay almost $150,000 per day to charter a vessel. Bunker prices going up. 3.1% bunker prices. Last month, 4.9% year on year. So all the economic indicators are still positive. Let's move the noise around. What is negotiation? What is reality? What is politics? There's a lot of negotiation going on. So we as businessmen, let's look for signals and act on those. Latin America, a lot of growth. And finally, confident that we can actually move together as one region. We see more and more trades linking our countries. And that to me, is a very important thing that we have to work on. What is our duty? Infrastructure. We are below Africa when it comes to infrastructure. You want to grow, we need to invest in infrastructure and technology.
And we're going to discuss a little bit more on that because it's a very interesting topic. So, Eduardo, in recent years, the payments landscape in Latin America has undergone a remarkable transition, driven by digitization and technological innovation. But this has happened despite facing significant challenges, economic and structural. So how have payments evolved in spite of all of these noise or growth challenges? What do you see from your role at Visa?
Well, before all, thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. And in payments in Latin America, the story has been a little bit better in terms of how fast electronic payments have been growing in the region in the last 10 years. But I could say that in the last 5 years, this industry has evolved more than in the last 50. The technology that everybody now has in a mobile phone is allowing financial services to be getting more and more into different segments of the population. 5 years ago, more than half of the transactions were made in cash. Just 5 years after, in Latin America, 60% of the transactions are now made in electronic payments. So whether it is a credit debit card, is it a real-time payment, or is a wallet, now the consumers and the banks are being able to get to segments of the population that never had access with this way of paying in the markets. It's very important also for the economies because a transaction that is made in electronic ways has a much higher probability of paying taxes. So the tax efficiency for the government, the growth that is associated with that is greater when the population is adopting electronic payments. 5 years ago, less than 50% of the adults in the region didn't have a bank account or a relationship with a formal financial institution. Nowadays, 70% of the adults in the region at least has an electronic wallet that is allowing them to transact electronically. Call it in the way you want it. A lot of it is because of the digital world, people want to stream music, video, so they need to have an electronic way to pay for those services. So those are the changes that we are seeing in the markets that are pushing these technologies. You now, in countries like Argentina, you tap and pay about 80% of the times. That means that it is easier for you to pay with your card or with your phone. Actually, here in Argentina, we just launched the subte, which is the metro in the Buenos Aires city, where you, with your regular card, any of your debit cards, you can just tap and get into the subte. That brings efficiencies for the transportation operator, brings efficiencies for the government and collecting those fees, and it is something that we see in over 25 cities in the region. So a lot of good stories, but leveraging much and more in the technologies that are available now for everyone.
Natalia, pensando un poco en cómo aprovechar esta oportunidad para Latinoamérica, lo que vemos es que hay muchas alianzas público-privadas que han sido una forma bastante popular de financiar todas estas inversiones que hace falta hacer. Entonces, dado este entorno dinámico, ¿cómo podría el sector privado seguir colaborando con el sector público para promover el crecimiento y el desarrollo, garantizando este éxito a largo plazo?
I will switch to Spanish because I'm the only Argentinian person in the panel. So, en Argentina, como todos los países emergentes de Latinoamérica, nos encontramos frente a un desafío y a la vez una oportunidad de poder acelerar la adopción de tecnología para convertirlo de verdad en un motor de progreso para el país. En Google creemos firmemente en el poder de la colaboración entre el sector público y el privado, que va a ser necesario para poder hacer un mayor desarrollo tecnológico y también poder impulsar el progreso. Ya es sabido, todos estamos escuchando hace mucho tiempo sobre la inteligencia artificial y los beneficios que va a traer a las compañías en términos de productividad y de desarrollo, y en un contexto dinámico como en el que estamos, es necesario en estos países la colaboración entre los dos sectores para poder impulsar conocimiento, impulsar infraestructura e inversión en infraestructura. Hay 4 pilares fundamentales que son importantísimos en los que tenemos que trabajar, en los que Google ya está trabajando. El primero es la inversión en infraestructura digital, conectividad. Hablábamos de la importancia de conectar un país conectado, porque el acceso a estas tecnologías va a depender de la conexión a Internet. Entonces, tener una red de conectividad de alta velocidad que atraviese el país y poder dar Internet a todas las comunidades del país. Es la única manera de incluir a todas las comunidades en el progreso a través de la tecnología. En segundo lugar, tenemos el talento. Argentina tiene más de 30 universidades y centros educativos. Estamos haciendo varias alianzas en términos de capacitación digital. Necesitamos alfabetización digital en el país para poder capturar esta oportunidad. Y es muy importante incluir también a todas las comunidades. Y además, en el futuro vamos a necesitar cada vez más personas con conocimientos digitales para poder aprovechar la digitalización dentro de las empresas. En tercer lugar están las políticas públicas. Se habla mucho sobre la necesidad de regularizar y de poner regulaciones sobre la inteligencia artificial, y es verdad, va a ser muy importante, pero a la vez tienen que ser políticas habilitantes que permitan el desarrollo de nuevas tecnologías, el desarrollo de nuevos productos y servicios para que podamos resolver problemas complejos locales, que los conocemos bien y hoy tenemos las herramientas para hacerlo. Y en cuarto lugar, es muy importante tener en cuenta todo el desarrollo de pequeñas y medianas empresas y el ecosistema de startups. Más del 70% de los startups ya están utilizando herramientas de inteligencia artificial. Estas compañías representan el 90% de los negocios en el país, emplean el 50% de las personas y contribuyen en un 40% al PBI. Hay que poner mucho foco junto con el sector público y desde el sector privado en ayudar al desarrollo de estas empresas en el país, porque van a lograr que podamos tener una economía resiliente, porque necesitamos que tengan sus estructuras y sus negocios estables. Entonces, en resumen, somos fuertes creyentes en que tenemos que trabajar en conjunto entre el sector público y el privado y no podemos dejar pasar esta oportunidad que la tecnología y la inteligencia artificial nos va a traer en términos de progreso.
Totalmente. Bueno, ahora profundizando un poco más en cada una de las industrias. Eduardo, banking has been key to facilitating economic growth and financial inclusion. As you mentioned, digital payments, electronic payments are increasing significantly compared to cash. So, how do you think, what's the importance of banking in continuing this path of inclusion and economic growth? And what things could financial institutions, together with public entities, do to implement further financial inclusion and growth?
Yeah, financial inclusion is, in our opinion, the variable that really measures the prosperity in a country. Because when you are financially included with a formal system, then you have options to grow in your life. I mean, you can start saving money, you can start getting your first credit, so you have access to different parts. If you're a small business, then you can operate in a way that you can manage your money, and then also you can have access to different credits or other types of investments that you could do. So including financially to the population is very, very important. But it's also a big effort to get into everybody in a country. The digital banks are now able to even grow faster in this way because you don't need to have the infrastructure of having the branches or of some other fixed cost that allow you to get into those segments of the population. But at the same time, the traditional and incumbent banks are also moving into that model. So it's very good to see that in Latin America, we have a huge competition, healthy one, with the traditional banks, whether private, international, or government-owned banks, with the digital banks in order to get access and to provide services to those segments of the population. So the more bancarized the people are, the faster growth you will have in a country. When we talk about financial inclusion, we usually think on a person that is receiving maybe for the first time their salary in an account. But we always need to think about the small businesses. When you as a small business open a bank account, you have access to many more services, and that's a part that is also important in the bancarization efforts. If we have a lot of these small merchants just transacting in cash, that part of the economy is left behind and not allowing really the government to have more efficiency in tax collection, as I was explaining earlier. So, I mean, in Visa, we are a technology company, basically, that connects financial institutions with merchants around the world, bringing efficient channels, and regardless on how the transaction moves to one side to the other, we need to make sure that the transaction is safe, interoperable, and whomever is receiving a payment with a Visa credential knows that a morning after, that sale is going to be deposited in your account. So that role that we have doing business in 200 countries around the world is a huge responsibility, especially when you talk about security. That's one of the challenges that we have now in this industry. Yes, you have more access because of the technology, but some other people can also have access and not trying to do the right thing on the network. So it's a big opportunity, and we are expanding very fast in the region.
Natalia, related to that, you mentioned the things that we need in order to promote digitization. How do you see that digitization impacting Latin America's growth?
El desarrollo en lo que es la digitalización en las empresas va a traer el mayor beneficio en los últimos años. Digamos, la inteligencia artificial promete traer niveles de productividad que no se conocen en la historia de la humanidad. Tenemos que poder capturar eso porque eso va a permitir transformar industrias claves para nuestro país, como es la salud, como es la logística, el agro. Va a poder traer transformaciones completas, no solo de los procesos productivos, sino también de los modelos de negocio. Hablábamos de las nuevas interfaces con los usuarios, las necesidades la manera en que las empresas empiezan a relacionar, y la digitalización trae el agregado de todo el conocimiento de datos, la analítica, que va a hacer que se puedan tomar decisiones de otro tipo y otro calibre, digamos, ¿no? Entonces, es muy importante la adopción de esto. Empresas como Google, volvemos al tema, van a ser necesarios temas de infraestructura de centros de datos. Google está invirtiendo en Latinoamérica, ya tiene más de 4 centros de datos a lo largo de Latinoamérica, cables submarinos que conectan Argentina, Brasil, Uruguay hasta Estados Unidos para mejorar los niveles de conectividad, y las empresas van a necesitar adoptar y digitalizarse para poder ser competitivas en un mundo global donde cada vez el competidor no sabemos dónde está, y los niveles de digitalización que los competidores tengan van a generarles una ventaja competitiva. Entonces se espera, nosotros entendemos, de acuerdo a un estudio que hizo Google respecto del impacto en países emergentes de la inteligencia artificial, se espera que para el año 2030 la inteligencia artificial pueda traer un valor económico superior a 3.4 billones de dólares en países emergentes, o sea, hablamos de Latinoamérica. Entonces, el potencial para las empresas, de cómo van a crecer, hablamos de escalar en grande en la Argentina. Creo que la digitalización va a ser uno de los pilares fundamentales para tener en cuenta en estos planes de progreso.
Y quien se quede fuera va a pasar un poco lo que nos pasó en los últimos años, ¿no? Que aumenta la productividad global y nosotros quedamos muy por detrás. Antonio, you mentioned that the transport infrastructure in the region is one of the worst globally, at par with Africa, and that makes that only 14% of total exports stay within the region. What role could companies play to improve the connectivity and the trade within the region?
Déjame cambiar también español para acompañar a Natalia.
Dale.
También porque también me siento campeón del mundo, estoy en Argentina, hay que hablar español aquí.
Muy bien.
Muy contento de estar aquí con los campeones del mundo. Yo creo que es súper importante entender la alianza público-privada. Nosotros hablamos del milagro en China, del milagro en Japón, del milagro en Corea. Todo se dio por la alianza público-privada. Y no sé por qué Latinoamérica se resiste tanto a que haya una alianza público-privada. Yo les quiero poner ejemplos a ustedes de la mente. Cuando los gobiernos llegan y tienen el reto de invierto en educación, o invierto en salud, o invierto billones en un puerto, ¿cuál va a ser la decisión? ¿Qué es lo que va a pedir el pueblo que hagamos? Eso es algo que todos los políticos tienen en la mente. En Costa Rica, hace un par de años, Costa Rica tenía ese reto. Tenían realmente sus vecinos muy avanzados en la parte portuaria. Ellos tenían una gran cantidad de exportaciones de productos refrigerados. No tenían un puerto de primer orden mundial para exportar. Nuestra compañía participó en lo que fue una licitación pública. Ganamos la licitación pública. Maersk construyó un puerto que hoy en día mueve 5 millones de contenedores. Hicimos una isla artificial. Ese puerto costó 1.2 billones de dólares, que hoy en día es uno de los puertos más eficientes que hay en América Latina y está pronto a expandirse ya en la fase 2 y 3. Ese es un ejemplo de lo que se puede hacer realmente alianza público-privada. Nosotros hemos escuchado a nuestros clientes en América Latina, este año nos están diciendo hay menos capacidad aérea en América Latina. como no tenemos puertos, hay que traer mucha carga aérea. Maersk acaba de abrir un centro de distribución aéreo, nuestros propios aviones en Miami, donde estamos conectando Asia y Europa con los países de América Latina. Alianza público-privada. En Chile y en Perú, en todo lo que es la parte de minas, había una gran necesidad de lo que eran trucks especializados para mover carga de alto peso. Maersk hizo la inversión y compró trucks directos para darle servicio a los clientes en todo lo que era la parte de minas. Y así vamos. En muchas áreas la inversión privada da. Yo soy un mismo ejemplo de lo que esto sale. Cuando uno llega y uno trae empresas extranjeras. A mi país, Panamá hizo una ley en el 2004 donde atraíamos los centros de headquarters de América Latina a Panamá. 117 compañías en el mundo han movido sus headquarters a Panamá y están para América Latina desde Panamá. Mi compañía es una de ellas. Cuando yo comencé en esta compañía, que tiene 121 años de existencia, hace 30 años que comencé yo aquí, no había un solo latino que estuviera en un cargo de directoría en América Latina. 30 años después yo tengo el puesto número 1 en América Latina. Eso se da porque hay transferencia de conocimientos, porque hay oportunidad de crecimiento, porque la compañía invierte en desarrollarnos y estamos listos en este relevo generacional. Entre más trabajamos juntos, público-privado, más oportunidades hay.
Scott, from your international perspective, what are the risks you see? You mentioned a lot about the opportunities, but what risks do you see for Latin America, and how can the continent better position itself for long-term stability?
Well, first of all, Canadian investors have been and are very active in Latin America and in Argentina. Mining, infrastructure, for instance, and Antonio speaking of the importance of infrastructure, you can't build the infrastructure you need on the public dime. The fiscal capacity simply is not there. But public-private partnerships with the Canadian pension funds, who are active currently but could become more active, are really important. So one of the things I recommend to countries, including my own, I hope my own country takes this advice at some point, but is to take a page out of the public policy of Australia around the long-term public policy frameworks around infrastructure. That's really important. In terms of risk, I do believe that this time it's different in Argentina. I was here as a minister in Justin Trudeau's government last time, and President Macri was president, and his economic team were doing a lot of really good things. And Secretary Cuerno is part of that team and is there today with President Milei. And the political conditions are different now. For whatever reason, President Milei is able to bring the public with him. I mean, you're cutting spending and you're raising taxes, yet you're still able to bring the public with you. That is a really remarkable accomplishment, and I hope that continues. But political certainty and policy certainty is extremely important for global investment. Now, as I said, Canadian companies, McCain Foods as an example, in addition to mining, the opportunities in agri-food and agribusiness, the opportunities in mining and infrastructure. There's a lot of lessons we've learned in Canada, and we're still learning. We don't get everything right. But I do think that the partnership between Latin American countries and a country like Canada, where we share so much of the same conditions. We were not colonizers. We were colonized. We have an indigenous population and a reality around that. And 30 years ago, they were protesting natural resource projects. In some cases, they still are. But we're also seeing equity partnership with indigenous peoples in energy projects and in mining projects to an extent we've never seen before. There's a lot of things we can learn from Latin America, and I'd like to think, as a Canadian, I'm congenitally incapable of bragging. It's not our style. But I do think that the partnership with not just government to government, but I think business to business and between business families. In Canada, we have a lot of multi-generational business families. They operate by a very high code of conduct and in terms of how they treat people and communities. I'd like to see the IEFA become a hub for this. And next year, I want to bring a lot of those families with me in the next gen so that they can build relationships that go beyond simply doing business, that can transcend even changes in government, but are based on trust as opposed to just transactions. I think what is happening right now in Argentina is really important for all of Latin America, and I hope that Canada can be a real partner, and I hope BMO, our bank, which is the largest bank in mining in the world, but also the third largest agriculture bank in North America. We're big in, I hope that we can, in energy and in a range of areas, nuclear, there's a lot of partnership potential I see, and I very much hope that Canada and, in fact, BMO can be a really great partner with Argentina.
Thanks, Scott. So we're running out of time, so maybe a very short round of questions. To understand, there are two topics that are extremely important. We've mentioned a lot about digitization and about sustainability. So maybe one final thought from each on these two topics. Natalia, if you want to share around digital transformations and what talent Latin America needs in order to do that.
Hablaba al principio que uno de los pilares fundamentales va a ser el desarrollo de talento en el país. Nosotros dentro de Google tenemos el Centro de Servicios y Soporte que atiende a todo Américas basado en Argentina. Eso tuvo que ver también con la cantidad de talento que hay en la Argentina y el talento desarrollado que hay en Argentina. Somos un hub de talento, pero tenemos que hacer mucho más en Argentina y en la región. Google invirtió $1.200 millones en capacitación en Latinoamérica, más de 120.000 becas en la Argentina. Trabajamos con distintas entidades. Es fundamental crear un ecosistema digital para capturar la transformación digital, y creo que el talento nos parece que lo tenemos, pero va a ser un bien escaso en los próximos años. Estamos comprometidos con hacerlo y con contribuir con el sector público. Son todos acuerdos con universidades públicas y privadas para generar las capacidades digitales. Así que estamos comprometidos con ayudar y con ser parte del crecimiento y del desarrollo digital de la Argentina.
Fundamental. Eduardo, ¿qué te parece interesante en digitalización para la banca? ¿Qué es lo que se viene? ¿Qué innovación ves que puede tener impacto en el continente?
Yo los invitaría a que todos ustedes que tienen una tarjeta credencial Visa piensen en que mientras más lugares tienen para usarla, también están más expuestos sus datos financieros. En Visa la parte de la seguridad es fundamental y por eso ustedes van a empezar a escuchar más un término que se llama token, y es que son números que son alternos a su número de tarjeta original, que si son utilizados por una transacción en particular, que si alguien se la roba no le va a servir de nada porque ese token está asociado a mucha de su información. Y el otro tema es con inteligencia artificial. Esto se vuelve más importante porque en muy poco tiempo, yo esperaría en los próximos, no sé, 2 años, el término de Agent AI va a empezar a haber mucho en el commerce, porque entonces ustedes van a tener un agente que a nombre de ustedes va a hacer transacciones, pero cuando ese agente llega y compra algo en nombre de ustedes, tendrá una forma segura de poderse autenticar para que entonces ese agente vaya y compre lo que ustedes. Rápidamente ustedes pueden decir, quiero comprar un par de zapatos, ya saben dónde han comprado, de qué color, qué talla, y el agente va a ir a buscar el mejor precio, y lo que ustedes van a ver es llegar los zapatos a la puerta de casa. Entonces, para todo eso, seguridad es fundamental.
Excelente. Antonio, pasando a sustentabilidad, dado que hay tantas iniciativas de carbon neutral shipping, ¿qué inversiones crees que tiene que hacer el sector privado junto al sector público para lograr tener en Latinoamérica una infraestructura sustentable?
Creo que es un tema súper importante. El que no cree que hay calentamiento global, los invito a Panamá a que experimenten 36 grados de temperatura con 100% de humedad. Se van a dar cuenta que es verdad que estamos mucho más calientes hoy en día que lo que estábamos 30 años atrás. Nuestra compañía decidió en el 2018 dejar de construir barcos. Y dijimos, no construimos un solo barco más hasta que sepamos cuál es la siguiente energía que podemos construir barcos. Nos demoró 4 años tomar una decisión y $400 millones que invertimos de nuestro propio dinero para saber qué hacíamos. La compañía, después de esos 4 años, regaló el estudio a todos los competidores y a los gobiernos del mundo que querían verlo y comenzamos a ordenar barcos de metanol. Hemos ordenado 25 barcos de metanol hoy en día y lo que más me place a mí es que Maersk ordenó 25, pero el mundo ha ordenado 125. Maersk no ve que la solución sea una sola energía que reemplace el fósil, sino un conjunto de energías. Amonia, metanol, metano, pero tenemos que dar un paso hacia allá. Yo creo que hay mucho, y aquí me he reunido en la mañana de hoy con varias compañías en Argentina que están viendo ese futuro, que podemos invertir, que podemos buscar energía limpia. Yo creo que Argentina va a jugar un papel fundamental junto con Chile, con México y otros players en América Latina que están buscando ya. Hoy en día, cuando Maersk pidió los primeros barcos, no había una sola compañía que vendiera metanol. Nosotros necesitamos de 40.000 a 50.000 toneladas de metanol por cada barco y tenemos 700. Tenemos una oportunidad de negocio. Hoy en día hay 6 compañías en el mundo que nos venden metanol. Una de ellas es latinoamericana. Puede que la siguiente esté aquí en Argentina.
And Scott, related to that, with the rise of sustainable finance, how is the Bank of Montreal supporting green investments in the region?
Well, first of all, we are North America's leader in sustainable finance as a bank, and we're the top mining bank in the world. But I think it's really important when we think of sustainability, the focus always is on the E, and which is, of course, critically important from the perspective of environmental sustainability. But we also have to understand the S and the social component of that. And the truth is that probably nobody in this room faces the real challenge that most people face in our countries, and that is that when energy prices go up and food prices go up, people can't pay the rent. So we have to ensure that affordability is at the very center of energy transition, which is why, for instance, nuclear is so important and has to be considered a sustainable energy source. I see great opportunity for cooperation between Canada and Argentina around critical minerals and around nuclear. And in fact, we just finished a few weeks ago our BMO mining conference, our global conference, and it's very clear that mining is central to energy transition today. But I also think that, consistent with the S in the ESG, that mining companies and Canadian mining companies are first in class in terms of helping build communities and helping support people. And in rural and remote areas, opportunities come through mining. And so there is I want to see BMO and I want to see Canada lead, not just in terms of purely environmental sustainability, but in social sustainability as well. And I think that the two can dovetail very well with each other, but we have to be conscious of it and deliberate.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Scott, Eduardo, Antonio, Natalia, for your insights. So just as a final reflection, we know we have an imperative to improve Latin America's productivity. We've heard about the opportunities in multiple sectors and the need to invest in things such as infrastructure, talent development, adoption of new technologies, and financial inclusion. But we are very confident after listening to this panel that governments, businesses, and communities will be able to collaborate in order to actually make that productivity increase happen and create this platform for sustainable, inclusive economic growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you.